Good morning, Year 4. Welcome to another Wednesday morning. Gosh, it's Wednesday already. Can't believe these weeks are rolling on by really quickly. Okay, we'll just get straight into it. I'd stopped partway through a chapter, hadn't I? So they've just arrived at the hotel. The hotel was right on the beach and just as beautiful as it had looked in the brochure. And there were elephants too, we were told, that sometimes gave hour-long rides all the way down to the beach and back. Every day I looked out for this elephant, but much to my disappointment it was never there. There were compensations enough though. We spent an entire week messing around on the beach, swimming and snorkeling. It was a week filled with endless sun and fun, and all in the very best way of being able to forget. Then on Christmas Day, Mum told me I wasn't getting a Christmas present this year. I was going to have an elephant ride instead. She'd arranged the whole thing for the next day, for Boxing Day. So that's how come on Boxing Day I found myself sitting there high up on an elephant, on a kind of cushioned throne. Mum said she thought it was called a howdah, or something that sounded like that anyway. There was a wooden rail around to hold on to, but when the elephant set off the ride was so smooth, I found I didn't need to hold on at all. I rode along the beach on my throne looking down at the world around me. I felt like a king up there. Or an emperor maybe, or a sultan. Except that Mum did rather spoil the illusion by trotting alongside taking photographs of me on her phone to send home to Grandma and Grandpa. I acted up for the camera, waving at it regally. Hi, Grandpa. Hi, Grandma. King Will here. What do you think of my new tractor then, Grandpa? I shouted all sorts of nonsense. This was better than I'd ever imagined. I felt on top of the world. Happy up there, Your Majesty? Mum said, beaming up at me. It's all right, I suppose, I told her. Mind you keep your hat on, Will, and your shirt. Don't want you getting sunstroke or sunburn, do we? She went on and on and on. And have you got your sun cream? And have you got the bottle of water I gave you? It's hot up there and it's going to get hotter. Yes, Mum, I'll be all right, Mum. I was trying to make light of my irritation. I'll be fine, honest, Mum. See you when I get back. Don't fall off, she called after me. Hang on tight, it's a long way down. You'll be all right up there, won't you? I didn't like her fussing over me, and especially not in front of the boy. I waved her goodbye, waving her away at the same time. Don't worry, Mum, go on, I told her. You go and have a swim. It's brill, Mum, just brill. And it was true. I'd never had a ride as brilliant as this, not as easy as this, nor as high as this. I remembered the donkey on the beach at Weston-super-Mare with its jerky little steps, and Minky, the Haflinger horse I'd ridden once in Switzerland, who used to break into a sudden trot whenever she felt like it, who'd bumped me up and down in the middle of the saddle so hard I couldn't sit down afterwards. This elephant was slow, gentle, dignified. Whatever this elephant had for shock absorbers was fantastic. All I had to do was move with her, sway with her rhythm, and this was easy as pie. It felt almost as if I was afloat. Riding an elephant seemed as natural to me as breathing. I had been so wrapped up in my own thoughts, so enthralled by the elephant and by everything around me, that only now did I think of Mum. I swivelled around in my howdah to look for her. I could see there were dozens of swimmers in the sea just below the hotel. I tried to spot her in her red bikini, or the light blue sarong that Dad had given her, but we'd gone a long way away from them by now, and I couldn't pick her out from among the others. The sea was so still now, it seemed almost unreal. It seemed to me as if it was breathing it in, then holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, something fearful. It made me feel suddenly anxious too, which is why I kept turning round now looking for Mum. I still couldn't see her. I began to feel myself being gripped by a rising panic. I didn't know why, but all I wanted to do was to go back. I wanted to be with her. I had to be sure she was safe. That was the moment Una stopped, without any warning at all. She was looking out to sea. Her whole body tensed. She was breathing hard, short, sharp breaths. Then she lifted her trunk and began trumpeting at the sea, tossing her head as if there was something out there, something that terrified her. The boy was trying to calm her, but she wasn't paying him any attention. I looked out to sea, and then I noticed the horizon had changed. It looked as if a white line had been drawn across it, separating sea from sky. And as I watched, I could see that this line was moving ever closer towards us. The sea was being sucked away, leaving hundreds of fish floundering on the sand. Una swung round, and before the boy could stop her, she was running towards the trees. In those first few hurried strides I very nearly fell off. I managed to stay on only by clinging on tight with both hands to the rail in front of me. I held on for dear life as Una stampeded up the beach and into the shadows of the jungle. I was being rocked so violently from side to side in my howdah that it was all I could do to avoid being thrown out. I leaned fast. Excuse me. I learned fast that I had to keep my head down, that whenever I looked up there'd be some overhanging branch just ahead of me, waiting to slash and whip and claw me, or even knock me off altogether. So I flattened myself face down in the cushion. I closed my eyes and with all my strength just hung on, riding the pitch and the toss as the elephant blundered through the trees, trumpeting in her terror. It was the trumpeting that I could not stand. It was so loud, so excruciatingly shrill, that it filled my whole head and the whole forest around me too. I longed to put my hands over my ears, but I couldn't let go of the rail. The elephant's terror became my terror, and I found myself screaming into the cushion, then biting deep into it, because it was the only way to silence my screams. I'd been to the fun fair with Dad, I'd done the Big Dipper and the waltzer, but that had all been make-believe terror, terror I could laugh at, terror I had to laugh at because Dad was, because everyone was, even though I was frightened out of my wits. They were all just laughing. But this was real terror. This was real life or death. I knew it because Una was trumpeting it. I had no idea then what she was running from, only that whatever it was must have been close behind us and coming after us and would kill us if it caught up with us. It wasn't until I felt the sun hot on my back of my neck that I realised we must be out of the dark of the forest. I dared now to lift my head at last and look about me. Una was charging on through a clearing with high grass and scrubby trees all around and then into a swamp. It occurred to me at once that if I threw myself off here, at least I would have a soft landing. But then, the more I thought about it, the more I knew I could never bring myself to do it. It was so far to fall, too far, and Una was running on now, even faster than before. I was still being tossed about in the howdah. I was having to hang on with all my strength so as not to be thrown out, but at least I had discovered a technique for staying in there by this time. Splaying my legs wide behind me, I found I could brace my feet against the rails and steady myself better. I was beginning to feel a little more secure. I even dared to raise myself up a little and twist round just for a moment to look behind me, see if the little boy had followed us. I had been hoping against hope all along that he wouldn't be too far behind, that Una would slow down and he would catch up, that somehow, some way, he would be able to bring this runaway elephant to a halt. But Una was showing no sign of slowing down, and the young man was nowhere to be seen. All this time I was trying to take it all in, to make some sense of it. Everything had happened so fast and was still happening. All I could be sure of now was that I had no one to turn to, that I was quite on my own. I was being carried off into the forest by a rampaging elephant who had been spooked by something or someone unknown. Whatever it was had transformed her from a ponderous creature of supreme gentleness and serenity into a wild, raging beast, maddened by terror, who seemingly had only one idea in her head: to get as far from the sea as possible, as fast as possible. Ahead of us, beyond the clearing, I saw there was a wide, rock-strewn stream. I was sure that Una must have to slow down to cross it. I hoped she might even stop altogether. She did neither. She ran straight down into it, launching herself into the river, so that the water exploded all around us, soaking me to the skin. Once through it, and out the other side, I saw there was a long open hill ahead of us before we could reach the tree line again. Only once she was climbing the hill did Una at long last slow to a hurried, scuttling walk, her head nodding vigorously with the effort of it, her grey ears flapping. I found the ride was suddenly easier, so I got up onto my knees now, still holding on, to see better where we were going, where we had come from. I swivelled round so that I could look behind us, back over the canopy of the forest, back the way we had come, down towards the blue ocean beyond. Only now did I understand what had spooked the elephant, and why she had kept running all this time. Everything I was seeing filled me with horror. A warm shiver of fear crept up my spine and into the back of my neck. The sea was rearing itself up into a towering wall of green water that was rushing in towards the beach, towards the hotel, towards where I knew Mum was swimming. I could hear it now too, a distant, thunderous roaring. People were running for their lives up the beach. I couldn't hear their screams, they were all too far away. But in my head I could hear their terror. I saw boats being picked up like toys, only to disappear moments later, simply swallowed by the sea. The great wave didn't curl over and crash along the beach as I was expecting, but it just kept coming, on and on, so fast and so high that it was unreal. It seemed to me like a virtual wave, an impossible wave. There was no beach to be seen anymore now, and as I watched I saw that the hotel itself was surrounded entirely by seawater. The first floor was already overwhelmed. Everywhere the water was full of swirling debris, cars, trees, telegraph poles. Entire roofs of houses were being swept along in the torrents like paper hats. I could see there were people caught up in it too, clinging on wherever they could. Any moment now I expected to see the wave crashing through the forest below us and come rushing up the hill after us. All I knew was that I had to get away. I had to go higher. It was my only chance. I leaned forward and slapped Una on the neck again and again, screaming at her to get going, to go faster. Whether or not she understood I didn't know, but to my great relief I felt her gathering her strength underneath me and then breaking into a lumbering shuffle up the hill and into the forest. All the while I was trying to come to terms with what I had seen. I was sure by now that it had to be a tidal wave, a tsunami. I'd seen one in a natural history program I'd watched back at home, a virtual one that had been set off after the volcanic eruption of Krakatoa. But this one was for real, and this was now. I had witnessed a terrible power within my own eyes. Knowing it and understanding it for what it was had a strange effect on me. I found myself suddenly calmer, more able to think things through. I now realized that Una must have sensed the danger, must have felt it coming long before she saw it, and long before anyone else saw it too. I recalled then something that the boy had told me, how he'd been so nervous of swimming in the sea earlier that morning. Somehow, even then, hours before, Una had felt something was out there, that it was on its way. That must have been why she turned and ran, when she had, and that was the only reason we'd got this far. Una was the only reason I was still alive. She was the only reason we were both still alive. I could tell Una was tiring now after her efforts. Her breathing was laboured, her steps faltered. I should have been ready for it, but I wasn't. When Una stumbled and nearly fell, I was hurled to one side of the howdah, losing my grip almost entirely. I just managed to cling onto the rail with one hand as I was flung over the side. I found myself dangling there, barely able to hang on, as Una barged and blundered her way through the undergrowth. All I knew was that if I was to let go, even if I survived the fall with no broken arms or legs, I wouldn't stand a chance on my own without this elephant. I had to hang on. Somehow I swung myself round so that I could cling on with both hands, trying all I could to scrabble up the elephant's side and haul myself up, but I hadn't the strength to do it. I knew that sooner or later my grip must weaken and I would fall, or maybe that a branch would knock me off as Una charged on. I cried out to Una then, begging her to slow down. Incredibly, she did. Even more miraculously, she came to a stop. Then I saw her trunk come curling round, felt it grasping me by the waist, lifting me up and depositing me in an ungainly heap back in the safety of the howdah, where I lay for some moments, limp and breathless. Already, Una was on the move again, walking on slowly at first as if allowing me time to recover. I rolled over onto my front and reached out for the handrail, bracing myself again with my feet as Una gathered speed. I closed my eyes, gritted my teeth, and determined there and then that nothing would ever make me let go again. Only now as I lay there exhausted in the howdah did I really begin to take in the dreadful meaning of everything that I had just witnessed. If Mum had been in the sea or on the beach or anywhere nearby when the tidal wave swept in, then she must have drowned, along with anyone else in its path. No one caught on the beach or in the sea could possibly have survived the onslaught of such a gigantic wave. No one would have stood a chance. She had told me she was going for a swim. It was almost the last thing that she'd said to me. I tried not to believe what this meant, but I had to. Choking back my tears, I kept telling myself that there was at least a possibility that Mum might have already left the beach by the time the tsunami struck, that maybe she'd been back in the hotel and had reached the safety of our room, which was, after all, on the top floor. If so, if she could still be alive, I wanted to believe that. But I only had to think again, and I would know in my heart of hearts that in all probability she had to have been in the water when the wave struck. I knew how much she loved her swimming and her snorkeling, how for a whole week now she'd hardly ever been out of the water, how each morning we'd raced each other down to the beach and into the water, and how she always swam like a seal, effortlessly and powerful. That last thought gave me a sudden lift of hope that maybe even if she had been caught by the wave, she might just possibly, because she was such a strong swimmer, have been able to swim her way to safety. But I realised that Mum's best chance of survival had to have been in the hotel. I tried all I could to persuade myself that she might have gone back to the hotel, to email Grandpa and Grandma again maybe, that she'd been up there in our room when the wave came in, that she was alive, that she was not dead and drowned, that she was right now thinking about me, that she'd be looking for me, coming to find me as soon as that she could. I tried all I could to convince myself that this must be true, and that the worst had not happened, but the more I thought about it, the more I was afraid that it had. As a last resort, I began to pray for God to look after her, to save her, until I remembered that the last time I prayed this, it had been for Dad that night before he went away to war. God hadn't been listening then, so why would he be listening now? In my despair, I lifted my head and cried out loud, not to God, but to Mum. Don't die, Mum, please. Mum, swim. You've got to keep swimming. You've got to. Don't give up. Please don't. I was interrupted by the sound of a strange throbbing, distant at first, but suddenly quite close, and then right overhead. I could see what it was now. A helicopter, glinting in the sunlight, up above the canopy of the trees. I was up on my feet at once, balancing as best as I could in the howdah, waving my arms wildly, and shouting at the top of my voice, but the helicopter was gone within seconds. Just that glimpse, though, was enough to give me hope again. I knew for sure that they must be looking for survivors, rescuing people, and that one of them could be my mother. It was at that moment that I had made up my mind. Whatever had happened, I had to go back to try and find my mum. I yelled at Una to stop. She didn't pay any attention. I pleaded with her. I shouted at her. I screamed at her. I slapped her neck. Then when I could see that none of it was doing any good, I tried to explain. She could be alive, I told her. I have to go back. I have to. Turn round, Una. You must turn round. We had to go back. But Una would not be stopped. If anything, she was going faster, blowing and puffing as she went, striding out more purposefully than ever, her trunk swinging, her grey ears in full sail. She was going where she was going, and that was that. I realised then that there was nothing whatsoever I could do to change her mind, and that I had to go where the elephant was going. I had no choice. Understanding this first, then simply accepting it, seemed to enable me to calm down and to think straight. Hadn't this elephant already saved my life? Hadn't she known exactly what she was doing right from the start? If so, then she was refusing to stop because she knew that the only safe place for both of us lay ahead of us high in the hills, deeper in the jungle, and that the quicker we got there, the better. I was also beginning to think that maybe this elephant understood things a lot better than I could ever have imagined, that she would not listen, would not turn around or go back, because there was just no point. She knew as I did, if I was really being honest with myself, no one could possibly be alive back down there on the coast, and that there was no use any more in pretending otherwise. As Una made her way ever onwards and upwards into the forest, I lay there in the howdah on my back now, staring blankly up at the trees above me, consumed utterly by despair, numb with grief and longing. I had no tears left to cry. I could feel the elephant was exhausted, that her stamina was fading fast. She was stumbling more often, breathing harder. She plodded on, tugging at the leaves around her from time to time, feeding as she went. By now, though, I no longer cared what she was doing, or where she was going, or even what might happen to me. I did not care about the oppressive humidity of the jungle, nor the flies that settled on me a bit and bit me. I was not frightened in any way by the wild, wide eyes of monkeys blinking down at me as I passed down underneath. After a while, I think I became altogether unaware of the passing time. Night and day were the same for me. I was neither hungry nor thirsty. I drifted often into sleep, but even when I was awake I was barely more conscious of what was going on around me than I was in my dreams. I was aware of the moon floating through the treetops, excuse me, of the buzz and the drone of the forest in the heavy heat of the day, of the raucous cacophony of screeching and howling that filled the jungle every night, of the sudden torrential downpours that somehow found their way through the canopy of trees and drenched me to the skin. None of it bothered me. None of it meant anything to me. I suppose I wasn't even aware enough of my surroundings to feel alarmed or threatened. It did cross my mind sometimes that I was in a place where there must be all manner of poisonous snakes and scorpions, and maybe even tigers too. I remembered in that holiday brochure seeing a photograph of a tiger prowling through the jungle. I could not have cared less. I was too lost in misery and grief to be fearful of anything. And we'll stop there. It seems he's going to be on a real adventure, so we'll wait to see what happens. Have a good day, everyone. See you soon. Bye bye.